Every life has a story. And I'm especially fascinated about stories about how people end up together and what makes for a lasting relationship, which is why I absolutely love the movie When Harry Met Sally. I watch it over and over. Do you have a movie like that? Well, each time I watch it, I'm surprised that I discover something entirely new. I mean, the first time I watched it, I experienced it as a classic romantic comedy filled with great stories. It left me inspired to keep kissing the frogs in my life in search of that promised prince and my own happily ever after. Well, the last time I watched it, I was surprised to actually notice something entirely different. It was the contrast between Harry and Sally's first disastrous encounter and the happy-looking couple gazing into each other's eyes on that movie poster. When we're introduced to the title characters in the opening scene of the film, nothing about that first encounter leads us to believe that they're on track to fall in love and to live happily ever after. Well, don't tell Harry and Sally this, but my favorite scenes in the film don't actually involve them. I prefer the stories of the more mature couples revealing how they found lasting love and that their relationship started out just like Harry and Sally, and that they often had to spend lots of time reconciling those differences. What's interesting is where their relationship started was not necessarily an accurate predictor of where their relationship had the potential to go, which led me to my aha moment. When Harry Met Sally is not a movie about falling in love. It's a movie about misunderstandings, people who don't speak the same language, and who often spend decades trying to reconcile those misunderstandings. What if technology could minimize misunderstandings in our own relationships? Does that sound far-fetched or maybe like a movie plot? Well, I think it's more real life and more realistic than you might think. I mean, depending on your age, your first encounter with the internet might have been a complete and total disaster. So a little history lesson. Before we developed intimate relationships with those mobile devices that we sometimes even take to bed with us, right? We had kind of an on-again, off-again relationship with something called the dot-com world. In fact, our start to the relationship with the internet was so rocky that to this day, I keep a printout of an email exchange with my college roommate, and it says this: "This email thing is completely ridiculous. There is absolutely no way this is going to catch on." Interestingly, she's gone on to become a very successful teacher. So how could somebody so smart make such a wrong prediction about the future of our relationship with technology? Well, see, what happened in the beginning was the internet did not yet speak our language, and we did not yet speak the language with the internet. And so just like those couples in the movie, our relationship was filled with misunderstandings that we've spent decades trying to reconcile. Well, also just like the couples in the film, where our relationship with technology started is not necessarily an accurate predictor of where our relationship with technology still has the potential to go. Well, one of the first attempts to reconcile our misunderstandings with the internet came to us through a likable, elegantly dressed character who I think was a bachelor named Jeeves. Ask.com introduced us to Jeeves back in 1997, and his nickname was the world's first internet butler. And the promise of Jeeves was he was going to make it really easy for us to get the answers we needed in this new internet world. And interestingly enough, Jeeves was also one of the first attempts to make technology more relatable to us, right? Because he came in the form of someone we could call by name, build a relationship, and ultimately trust. So the promise of our relationship with Jeeves was that we could trust him with the answers to our most urgent questions and then get exactly what we needed. Well, in case you've forgotten, here's how it works. Simply open your favorite internet browser using your desktop computer. Have I lost some of you there? All right, so it gets worse. So then we type www.askjeeves.com and then type in that burning question like how to prevent snoring or how to cure your current cold. And then the idea was Jeeves would bring us some answers. Well, the challenge was our relationship with Jeeves lacked some chemistry, kind of like a bad movie. Why? because we didn't always get what was promised with Jeeves. When we asked him questions, he often had to come back and ask us questions. Sometimes he was slow to respond, and when he did provide an answer, sometimes it was either an incorrect answer or, worse yet, no answer at all. So what happened was, when we kept asking for the help we were promised and then we didn't get it, we quickly abandoned our almost relationship with Jeeves. Well, flash forward a couple of decades and we're still trying to solve the problem of how to ask for help. Except we've progressed from asking Jeeves to asking Alexa, and from typing our questions in an online internet browser to having live voice-activated conversations. I mean, Alexa is great, right? If you want to ask her something like the weather. She's not so great when you find out your kids are talking to her like Santa, and mysterious amounts of little brown boxes filled with toys and candy you didn't order are showing up on your front step, right? It's that horrifying moment when you open the door, like, who ordered the live pony? Get down here, you are so grounded. So we're right back in the thick of those misunderstandings, right? They've just progressed from the kind that we had with Jeeves. Well, Alexa's taught us a couple of things. First of all, how to ask for help consistently and more often than not get it. And Alexa has also provided us an improved ask and answer experience. But Alexa's still missing one fundamental characteristic that's vital to the success of every relationship: the ability to understand and filter context. Right? Alexa does not have the context that you and I live on a limited budget. Alexa does not have the context about who makes purchasing decisions in our households. And so what happens? We stop just short of trusting an Alexa with all of our asks. Well, what if the Alexa of the future could filter context and then ultimately eliminate our need to ask for help entirely? I mean, think about that. Well, the reason I got so invested in the answers to those questions and what might be possible is because there was a time in my life where I desperately needed that kind of help. So I entered my 30s looking like this and feeling energetic, enthusiastic, and ready to take the world by storm without even the slightest glimpse of the plot twist that laid ahead: major medical. I spent 8 years battling a chronically misdiagnosed illness that fundamentally changed the course of my life. In addition to gaining 50 pounds and possibly competing to be a body double with this bear, my hair fell out, my skin turned gray, my eyes changed color, and my memory faded away. I didn't know what to call this very mysterious illness, and neither did a team of doctors. At the peak of my illness, I could barely make it through an hour, much less through a day. I felt terrified, overwhelmed, exhausted, and hopeless. What if the hardest part of being sick isn't actually being sick? What if it's renewing your driver's license, or paying your electric bill, or finding the energy to manage life's endless, tedious tasks? I would love to have had a very advanced Alexa that could do things like that. And maybe even take on other tasks like call my doctor and make appointments on my behalf, or phone the pharmacy to check on the status of my prescriptions and remind me to pick them up, or track my increasingly mounting medical regimen and remind me to take the right pills at the right times, or maybe even go as far as being able to contact the insurance company on my behalf to try to resolve a disputed claim. Well, it turns out I'm not the only one who could benefit from that kind of help. Consider people like my longtime friend, Monica. She's a fitness enthusiast who dreamed of rehabilitating and competing again after sustaining an injury. Or overwhelmed mothers like my friend Reagan, a now working single mother of triplets who spent multiple months in the neonatal intensive care unit. Or older adults living alone, like my grandfather, who found himself living alone for the first time in his life after my grandmother passed away following 65 years of marriage. how could technology mature enough to become the nutritionist, the nanny, and the nurse that they need? And more importantly, how could that same technology evolve even further to enable me to provide them with the help they need when they need it without ever having to ask? Well, the good news is we're starting to get glimpses right now that that and so much more is actually possible. And so recently I decided to kick up my heels and start pursuing some answers to some of the very questions I've just posed to all of you. And here's what I discovered. There are apps available right now that you can download that are capable of carrying on live interactive conversations using really human-sounding voices, not the bad customer experience call of the past. And these aren't just the kind of simple ask and answer conversations that we've gotten used to with newer technology. These are dynamic, context-based conversations that truly replicate what it's like when two live people talk to each other. And that's not all. That same app connects to my calendar and my contacts and can do things like make appointments and reservations on my behalf. How far does technology like that have the potential to go? Well, I think it's fun to consider in the context of something like making a restaurant recommendation or reservation. It might be a little scary to consider in the context of calling your doctor to talk about your test results on your behalf. Why? Because when we trust technology with our most confidential information, like our health data, we want to be absolutely certain that technology is embedded with the context about how to use that information in a responsible way and also for our benefit. Well, every relationship involves risks, right? And when we start to give into those risks, we begin to fall short of the potential. And when I consider how far we've come from that clunky, disappointing experience of asking Jeeves to where we are right now, what I realize is this. The potential we have to gain the help we need in the future far exceeds the information we'll be required to provide in order to get there. Which takes me back to my own medical crisis. I mean, what if an app or a technology had existed like that when I was so sick? Now, I'm not suggesting that I could have gotten correctly diagnosed any sooner, but could something like that have freed up more of my time to spend on getting well instead of spending so much time on managing all of those tasks? Or maybe even gone as far as reducing my need to ask my family and friends for help so often. Isn't it mind-blowing to consider that technology has the potential to filter context and meaning over time and then take action, perhaps more accurately and more consistently than our very own family and friends? And yet that's exactly what's possible. How many misunderstandings could that eliminate? And how could that potentially change the very nature of our human relationships? Well, spoiler alert, we're back to the movie, and good news, Harry and Sally find their way back to each other. Isn't that amazing? It turns out that they reconcile their misunderstandings, fall in love, and they do live happily ever after. And right at that moment when the music swells, Harry looks into Sally's eyes and he says, when you meet somebody you want to spend the rest of your life with, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. How long are you and I willing to wait to reconcile misunderstandings in our own relationships? Which takes me back to the example of my grandfather that I shared with you earlier. He's a first-generation American, a World War II Navy veteran, and he found himself living alone for the first time in his life after my grandmother passed away. He and I have a great relationship. I'm going to tell you, we do not always understand each other. And so what I wonder is, how could technology in the future play a role in reducing the misunderstandings that he and I have? I mean, it would be great for an app to be able to tell me something like, he remembered to take his pills today. What would be life-changing is if that very same app could provide me with the context that he's actually lonely, and then prompt me to call him and have a conversation. Getting that kind of help without having to ask for it is a way for all of us to live happily ever after. The end.